to DIT, maybe Shankar Agarwal, you will meet him tonight, on carrying this message to all the Common Service Center to educate the people there in and around, or at least those who come to that CSC, about some of these issues, about their vulnerabilities. If there is a Nigerian male, watch out. Not just to your CSC, even in your mobile, Nigerian, touch nahi karo. Of course, Nigeria will get upset. That's a separate issue. But that's a very good suggestion. You know, their outlet are 1 lakh. They touch huge reach is very high. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, suggestions?
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Pawan Duggal. Since you mentioned about Section 43A and a lot of policies coming up in terms of reasonable practices on security, what we found was that when you're saying that data is sensitive, organizations probably don't have a guideline in terms of how to identify which data within the organization is sensitive. And if it is identified, what are the measures they could probably look at, or the solutions that they could look at, maybe possibly in terms of encryption, non-repudiation. What are the suggestions that would be coming on from the Act perspective?
Well, if you're dealing with sensitive personal information, the Act gives various parameters that you have to mandatorily comply with. If you don't comply with, your exposure for civil and criminal penalty starts. So my suggestion is, well, for example, you get your due diligence. If you're only focused on 43A, there are certain parameters you need to comply, and there's a documented due diligence process that's done. For example, my law firm does that for a large number of clients, where we do a due diligence specifically to your operations. Now, if you're an intermediary, you have a much wider due diligence. But if you are just a company who's dealing with sensitive personal information, your due diligence and compliance requirements are relatively smaller. But they're far more harsher in the sense that you have to go far more detailed. So if you're able to do that, then your liability stops. Come what may, any kind of litigation comes to your door, you can say, okay, I've done this, the law gives me an exit route, I'm exiting, you catch hold on the other person. So I think therefore, the focus will have to be more on your organizations trying to comply with the parameters for reasonable security practices and procedures.
So just to add to that, for the large initiatives that are coming up on, say, CCTNS or Treasury, there is a lot of sensitive data which is residing everywhere. The state data centers is massively deployed. There are a lot of government organizations who are hosting their data in the state data center. How does an organization within the government know that, yes, this data is potentially sensitive and I need to probably protect it? At this point in time, there's no guideline to that at all.
Right. What's government has come up with certain notifications. Now, if you look at the notifications, they have now limited the scope of what is sensitive personal information. The draft notifications had much bigger scope. Now the scope is far more less limited. So now you can concentrate. But yes, government organizations will not be allowed to argue, I did not know what was sensitive information. In case an event has happened, I'm sovereign and I'm exempt. That sovereign exemption argument may not work. Given the specific requirements of 43A, I think the government departments will have to ensure that the rules and regulations that are made under 43A and 79 are appropriately complied with, primarily because the government, when it's doing any such thing, becomes a network service provider, becomes an intermediary. And therefore, even if it's a sovereign function, it still is not exempt from doing its mandatory compliances. So I think there has to be large number of awareness programs. Large number of departments are currently not even aware of what their obligations, what their exposures are under the Act. And I think we really need to do quite a lot in this regard. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a small supplementary question? Pawan, and I want some comments from Sujay, Dr. Subramaniam, and Srivatsan also. Has the time come for organizations to appoint CSO?
I have no doubt in my mind that they have to appoint some things like that. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult. That's my opinion. Yeah.
I think absolutely. Every organization today has a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. And his primary role is to define the do's and don'ts, keeping in view the sensitivity of the data, customer data, which is being held, within the organization. Because we at NIT, for example, are dealing with many global organizations and the data resides here.
In
So
India, how many percentage of the organizations have that? 10%?
I think certainly a lot more than 10%. It would be around 25%. That's my guess. Absolutely.
I may just add,
That probably increases government also. Includes.
IGNOU runs a program on cyber law in the open mode, and we have quite a number of police officials and others who are students of that. We can modify, add more modules in the light of the act, expand it into a full diploma program. So that this is important even to certify CISOs. Otherwise, they are not able to face. Yeah, right. So we are ready. Okay. We are also having one more program on information security. I would like to invite CERT to cooperate and let us have an open program in CERT services, which is very important, I believe.
Any other questions? Last question.
Yeah, Mr. Dugal, in order to enforce compliance with the provisions of the laws that you mentioned, like we have a statutory auditor requirement and a statutory computer company secretaryship requirement, is there any provision in law contemplated to have mandatory CISO whenever you're involved in any cyber applications in your government or non-governmental organization?
Currently, unfortunately, no at the time when I'm talking to you. But the law is now coming up with the concept of an electronic audit. The law says that if any other law requires any documents to be audited, then you will have to go through an electronic audit vis-a-vis the same documents to the extent to which they are in the electronic form. So I think we are likely to see far more increase of auditing of electronic records as time passes by. But clearly, the time that you're talking of, we still have a couple of paces to move ahead. Thanks.
Does it include how long a document should be stored? Oh, yes. Electronic storage. Like the way things like birth certificate, hospital records, you say minimum 20 years, 30 years you have to store. So similarly, electronic version storage, is there included in any of these things?
Yeah. Electronic versions, whatever your existing laws are saying for the actual world, the same time frames are going to apply for the electronic as well. So with income tax, 7 years. Financial, 7 years. So whatever the relevant law is there, this law has said, okay, we will comply with the same for the electronic parameters as well, to start with. Of course, I think as time passes by, those figures of time are going to increase far more. For example, at no point of time do I see the government saying, I'm going to purge, say, the income tax records from X year onwards. Because everything is going to be more electronic. Storage is becoming cheaper. I think
cheaper and you can retrieve and all that much faster for 10 years, 5 years, much more effectively.
Correct. That's wonderful.
Okay, with that, we will thank the Honorable Chairman, who unfortunately could not stay back, Ms. Bhamati, Mr. Pawan Dugal, the distinguished speakers, Mr. Pawan Dugal, Sujay Chaudhary, Dr. Subramaniam, or you want Professor Subramaniam, Professor Srivatsan, and Mr. Sharma. For all of them spoke in their respective topic extremely well. Please give them a good clap.